And we are live. Hello, everybody. This is Bad Left Hook's Connor Rebush, and I am here with the Lord and Savior of the Sweet Science, Scott Christ,
Hey,
Master of Bad Left Hook. Scott,
it's
how you doing?
Chris, and I'm psyched about knowing how to pronounce your last name now too.
Rebush. Yeah,
Yeah,
I've considered many times changing it and just adopting a pseudonym, but it's too late now.
yeah. Trust me, I considered changing mine a few times and going with a pen name, but
For different reasons.
yeah.
Well, as I unprofessionally sip from my water,
Oh
um,
yeah, yeah.
we are here today to break down the upcoming boxing mega event, as the press releases keep referring to it. Of course, Floyd Mayweather Jr., greatest boxer alive today by most people's standards, is fighting Marcos Maidana. Not the greatest boxer alive, but still a damn good test. And that's just an incredibly highly anticipated fight. But there are other fights on that card too, which you may not know about if you're not much of a boxing fan, or you may would like to hear more about if you are. And we are going to Scott and I are going to run through those fights today, starting with the first fight on the card, Jaleon Love versus Marco Antonio Paraban. I got to be honest, this one just doesn't carry very much heat compared to the other fights on the card. It's not any fault of these fighters. This would be great on like a Friday Night Fights main event or something. But compared to the three other fights on this card, it just doesn't have that luster.
No, and really with boxing, and if we're getting people who aren't big boxing fans and watch pay-per-views a lot, this is more or less the best you're going to get out of a pay-per-view opener. It's like this. It would be a solid showbox main event, solid Friday Night Fights main event, or a decent undercard fight on a Showtime Championship Boxing or something like that. But as a pay-per-view fight, nobody's buying for this fight, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a competitive matchup. It's a relevant matchup at 168 pounds. Jaleon Love is looking to get into contention. Marco Antonio Paraban is looking to stay in contention. He had a title shot last year, vacant title fight against Sakio Bika, which was a competitive, interesting fight. Not anything, it wasn't a spectacular fight by any means, but Paraban is a solid fighter, and I think he does have. He's not the house fighter in this fight. That would be Jaleon Love, who is maybe the most advanced of the Mayweather Promotions prospects. But I think Paraban has a really good chance in this fight. And I said earlier on Twitter, I was talking about this fight a little bit during the undercard press conference. I think this kind of reminds me a little bit of the fight on, I think it was the Mayweather Cotto undercard with DeAndre Lattimore, the Mayweather Promotions fighter, against Carlos Quintana, a solid veteran, a good veteran. And I think that's kind of what we've got here. And in that fight, I saw the upset coming, and it did happen. In this fight, I don't genuinely see the upset coming like I saw in that fight. But I do think there's a pretty good chance that Jaleon Love could get knocked off here. He hasn't been that impressive at 160 or since going up to 168. He seems to have pretty much decent attributes all across the board, and he's not really good or great at any one thing. So I don't know what his total upside is. I think he's got a somewhat a low ceiling, but again, it's a decent enough fight, perfectly acceptable for the first fight on an undercard. Kind of what we saw in the Pacquiao Bradley show, a decent matchup in the first fight, and not big name fighters, but well matched and should be an interesting enough fight.
And let's compare it. I mean, comparing this undercard to the undercard of the Pac Bradley rematches, it's really no contest. I mean, that was those fights all turned out to be excellent fights, but compared to name value, I mean, this is more along the lines of any of the fights we'd have seen on that undercard. This is actually a very stacked undercard by boxing standards.
Yeah, well, in terms of name value, it's very good. Not all the matchups are great. I mean, we'll get to the other one, but but the co-feature is very good with Amir Khan and Luis Collazo, and this opening fight, again, well-matched, solid matchmaking, two guys who seem to be right about the same level, and you can't really ask much more than that for the first fight on a four-fight card.
You have a pick in this fight, Scott?
I am leaning toward Marco Antonio Paraban. I think I expect it to be a competitive fight, a close fight. I wouldn't see Jaleon Love or Paraban as a major underdog in this fight, so what I'm looking at is maybe a round or two toward Parabon in his favor, giving him the win here. I don't know if he'd actually get that on the cards if it came down to that, but I think it should be a decent fight, and I'm going with Parabon over the house favorite, Jalen Love.
I'm going to go ahead and pick against Jalen Love as well, not because I have any meaningful analysis on this, but because I remember all too well how he robbed one of my favorite fighters, Gabriel Rosado, not so long ago.
Yeah.
But it wasn't his doing, but
right, exactly.
I would like to see a little karmic justice regardless. So next up on the card, we get into the first of the big name matchups. This one could very likely be the next one could be a main event on an HBO or Showtime show. This one, not so much. One of the names is big, but it's still a fun fight just because of the name value of the fighter involved. This is Adrian Broner versus Carlos Molina, who are junior welterweights. They are fighting for in a 12-round bout as well. Broner, of course, was one of the most hyped prospects in a long time. Floyd Mayweather's little brother, as they say, although he doesn't really have the Mayweather style. And Broner was very satisfyingly, in a lot of people's eyes, including mine, beaten up by Marcos Maidana, which earned Maidana his title shot against Floyd Mayweather tonight.
Well, yeah, I hate this fight. I really do. I mean, I can't lie. I really, really hate this matchup. It's nothing against Carlos Molina, but he's not this level of a fighter. And, the last time we saw him was the last time he fought, which was in December 2012 against Amir Khan. And, I mean, he tried. He was game. He worked hard in that fight. He really tried to make a go of it. And it's just the talent level was so grossly in Khan's favor. I mean, the fight just wasn't close. He's not really Molina's not really a 140-pound fighter to begin with. He came up from 135 to fight Khan at 140. Now he's coming back at 140. And look, he's here because he presents no real risk to Adrian Broner. Molina is not a puncher. He's not a guy who's going to he doesn't have the skills of Adrian Broner to begin with, and then he doesn't have a puncher's chance. So, I mean, what are we really watching? We're watching someone, go back to a level that they were already beyond when Broner was, getting the TV hype from HBO and then from Showtime. We saw fights against like Eloy Perez and Martin Rodriguez and, Vicente Escobedo, these guys who were just completely physically overmatched against Adrian Broner, and I just don't see I get why this fight is happening. I see the point in it, but I still just don't see. I mean, Broner has nothing to really gain from this fight other than telling people that they can say, well, Broner's back, but nobody who knows even a little bit is going to believe that he's back because this fight is such a one-sided nothing fight on paper. And again, it's nothing against Carlos Molina, but it's been a year and a half since he's even been in the ring. And when they were rumored originally that it was going to be Adrian Broner against John Molina was the first reports. And I thought that was a fairly interesting fight because John can at least punch. He can take a shot, as we saw against Matisse.
He's a lot like Maidana.
Yeah, it was an interesting matchup because it was like Maidana, but maybe arguably a lesser level. Mm-hmm. And I thought he could have proved something in that fight against a tough guy who has pulled off some knockout rally wins that were very dramatic over guys like Hank Lundy and Mickey Bay. I thought that would have been a pretty decent matchup. This one, I have no interest in this fight other than seeing Adrian Broner and get back in the ring and get his career going again. And after he gets through with this one, maybe gets back into something more significant.
Now, it could be the reason I'm interested in this fight, of course, just seeing Adrian Broner trying to get back on track is interesting. For whatever you may feel about Broner, he's definitely a talented boxer. May have been sold a little too highly for the level he was at, but he's definitely a talented fighter. But I'm interested in this fight as looking at it as kind of a test of how Broner will approach his opponent. Because the thing about Broner is that that crab shoulder roll style that he tries to do, which he's basically imitating Floyd when he does that, because his trainer didn't teach him to box that way. That's not the type of boxing that he came up doing, and his trainer Mike Stafford has said that before. That's just Broner likes to do that, and I think it's obvious watching his fights, even against Maidana. Broner does a lot better when he actually comes forward, quits the counterfighter shtick, and puts on some aggressive pressure. So I'll be interested to see if Broner is still in there. We'll still be looking to show flash and impress people with his counter fighting style that he doesn't really possess,
Yeah.
or if he will march Molina, will walk Molina down and get him out of there early. I would really, I mean, that's the one thing that makes this fight kind of important in my eyes, is that if Broner can walk Molina down, if Broner can show that he knows how to pressure and can be more of a boxer puncher and less of a counter fighter, I think that would be a good sign for his future in the sport.
Yeah, and that's the one really troublesome thing about Adrian Broner. It's not the talk and any of that stuff. That's just hype. That's just selling. That's just trying to make some kind of a name for yourself. I think he's got the wrong ideal with that a lot of the time. But he does a Floyd Mayweather imitation like all the time, in and out of the ring when the cameras are on. I don't know what he does everyday life, but the fighting style is the biggest part of that. That's an issue because he can't do it. He can kind of look like he can do it, and he can pull it off and be successful against a guy like Gavin Reese. And if he does it on Saturday night, he'll be successful against Carlos Molina because Molina is just not good enough to take advantage of it. Marcos Maidana was a big enough puncher to take advantage of it. Paulie Malignaggi is not a puncher, but is a smart enough fighter and a talented enough fighter that he gave Adrian Broner problems using that style. And Daniel Ponce de Leon a couple of years ago did that, and that was before we got to Broner at 147, because if you want to argue maybe Broner's not really a welterweight yet, I perfectly understand that, and I completely agree with it. But, Daniel Ponce de Leon wasn't fighting him at 147. Broner has had trouble with all of his better opponents. Every single one of them. Ponce de Leon arguably beat him, didn't get the cards. Malignaggi arguably beat him, didn't get the cards. And then Marcos Maidana pretty much beat the crap out of him over the course of that fight in San Antonio. So I think it'll be interesting to see. I agree, it'll be interesting to see if he maybe chucks that style that he's not good at and gets to how he actually should be fighting. He is a good fighter. He's got good hand speed. And I agree he looks best when he's trying to lead the fight. That's when his skills can really shine, because he's not a good counter puncher. I mean, he's an okay counter puncher, and that's not going to get it done on a higher level. That'll get it done against a guy like Molina. But if he comes back out next time, let's say he faces Maidana again by the end of this year, which is completely possible, that same style is going to get him beaten again. I mean, it just will, because he's going to get hit too often by a guy who can punch. So I'm, kind of looking forward to seeing Broner back in the ring just to get his career started again.
Agreed.
He's still not interested in the fight itself.
I agree. If Broner comes out, the thing is this will be disappointing right off the bat if Broner comes out and shows his same old style, because he'll still beat Molina doing that, but it won't tell us anything about Broner.
Exactly.
I'm very interested to see if Broner will come out as a somewhat changed fighter, if he'll listen to his corner a little more. He's got all the talent in the world. He could be a future title contender. He just needs to make those tactical adjustments. Next up on the card, we've got a fight that I'm really looking forward to. This is Amir Khan versus Luis Collazo. Both of these guys are excellent fighters. I'm particularly a big fan of Collazo. This is another welterweight contest like our main event, another 12-round fight, and this very likely could determine the next opponent to face Mayweather. That is, if Mayweather beats Maidana, as he's expected to do. What are your thoughts on this fight, Scott?
I like this matchup a lot. I admire the sort of career that Amir Khan has had. I don't think he's ever avoided fights. I don't think he's ever looked for easy fights. When he came back against Molina, that was just a regular tune-up kind of fight. But, he was coming off of a knockout loss. He was going in with a new trainer, so that made sense. He's had 2 fights under Virgil Hunter. They haven't been that impressive. I mean, he beat Molina easily, but it was just Molina. And then he struggled, frankly, against Julio Diaz, which nobody saw coming. And Julio Diaz, he's a decent fighter, but still, a guy like Amir Khan should have been able to more or less dominate that fight. Coming in now against Luis Collazo, who is, I'm not going to say he's a top 10 welterweight, because he's not. He could be if he wins this fight. That maybe you would have the argument then, but it's a strong division, and I just don't think that beating Victor Ortiz, who I mean, going in, we couldn't have predicted what would happen the way that it did. You couldn't have seen that coming, a knockout in the second round. But I think with the benefit of hindsight, we saw Victor Ortiz in that ring not really wanting to be there. I think, coming in, he probably did, but once he got cracked a little bit, I think he just sort of mentally shorted.
Which is kind of characteristic of Ortiz's fights.
Yeah, and in coming back from the broken jaw and almost 2 years off, I just don't think it was there for him once he got hit, because it wasn't even that big of a shot, but he was down. He was, I think, mentally done as much as anything. So yeah, it's a good win, and I think as much as anything, he deserves a fight with a guy like Amir Khan to take a shot and maybe show that it wasn't just a fluke and it wasn't just Ortiz coming out there not being ready for a fight. But I still, it wasn't that long ago that Luis Collazo was losing to Freddie Hernandez. Now, granted, that was at 154 pounds, and Amir Khan is totally unproven above 140. Even the fight with Diaz was a catchweight at 143. Khan didn't look great. He says he's stronger. He says he's faster, but he said these things after every loss or every disappointing performance. And Amir Khan has never really changed. He's always been an action fighter to a fault. I mean, it's not. Ideally, that wouldn't be who he is. I'm happy that that's who he is. I mean, because it makes it a lot more fun for me to watch. I would much rather watch this Amir Khan than the Amir Khan that very handily beat Andrei Kotelnik a few years ago, which was, I think, probably, from a boxing standpoint, that was probably the best performance of his career. But it's not a fight people really remember. They remember, the times that Khan got knocked out, which is unfortunate for him, but, it was an exciting fight. They remember his fight with Maidana, which was a huge win for him. It was a very exciting fight. They remember him beating up Paulie Malignaggi. I mean, so when you get him in with Collazo, I think this is an interesting style matchup because Collazo isn't a heavy puncher, but he's not feather fisted. I mean, he's not Malignaggi. He can crack a little bit. And I think that just Collazo being a legitimate 147-pound fighter and somebody who's not, shot or even really over the hill, he's about, still relatively close to where he was in his prime. And he's 33, he's not old, so he's not beaten up. So, I think this is an interesting fight. At 147, Collazo's given tough fights to Andre Berto and to, a Ricky Hatton back then. And the way I look at it, would I make today's Amir Khan a heavy favorite over Ricky Hatton of 2005 or 6 or whatever it was, or against Andre Berto from 2009? Not really. I mean, I think those would both be interesting fights, and I think this is an interesting fight. It's a good style matchup. Collazo is tricky. He's crafty. He's a southpaw guy. He's very intelligent in the ring. He's a good, well-schooled fighter. And Amir Khan, can say he's going to change, say he's going to fight differently, but the bottom line is he's always reacted the way he's reacted to getting hit. He comes back and he fights because that's just who he is. And I don't, Virgil Hunter is not to blame if that doesn't change because Freddie Roach couldn't change it. The trainers before Freddie Roach couldn't change it. It's just who Amir Khan is. And that's why I like this fight because I think there's upset potential and I think there's the potential for Khan to go out there and get a really good win.
Mm-hmm. I agree with pretty much everything you said there. Khan... Yeah, it's just something in Khan's mentality that makes him fight that way, and I don't think that that's anything that anyone can really change. I think it's very, very difficult to get a fighter to fight in a way that isn't conducive to his personality.
Yeah.
And I think for Khan, it may be a matter of him not liking to get hit, that he starts to swing back so desperately when he gets touched.
Yeah.
In that matter, I kind of see an advantage for Collazo in this matchup. I'm a big fan of Collazo's style, actually. I really enjoyed the fight he put on with Victor Ortiz. I thought it was a calculated fight the whole way. His fight with Andre Berto, even though he lost that fight, it was close. I thought, that was some of my favorite infighting I've seen in a modern boxing match.
That was a great fight. That fight is really, really underrated in terms of better fights of the recent years. I love that fight.
Yeah, Berto was doing a lot of holding, and Collazo was doing a lot of anti-holding. He was doing some great work on the inside with his forearms, shoulder bumps, landing these short punches, and I'm a sucker for infighting, so I love that kind of stuff. I'm not sure if we're going to see a lot of it here against Amir Khan, though. He's not a guy who's really easy to tie up on the inside, to get in close with, to have that gritty kind of fight. He's going to be dancing around. He's going to be throwing lightning fast punches. I'm not really sure who to pick in this matchup, to be honest. I like Collazo stylistically better than I like Khan. I know that most people probably disagree with that because Khan is definitely an action fighter.
Yeah.
I just think Collazo is pretty slick, and I have a soft spot for crafty veterans, which is how I view Collazo at this point.
Yeah.
But I mean,
No, go ahead.
who are you feeling in this matchup?
I'm going to. I want to go with Luis Collazo because I think he's got a very good chance, but I'm going to go with Amir Khan. If I were trying to measure how sure I am, I think I'd be about 55-45 for Khan. I'm not terribly confident picking either guy, and that's why this is the fight I'm looking forward to most on the card. For one thing, it's a good even matchup. It's well matched, and that's the key to everything being entertaining in boxing is just making the right matchups. I mean, you can even have a clear favorite, but if you make a good matchup, we saw it last week with Matisse and Molina. I mean, you had a clear favorite going into that fight, and it turned out to be basically the fight of the year so far, and it's going to be hard to top, too. So with this fight, I don't think we're going to get like a fight of the year type of fight, but I think we're going to get a very interesting tactical fight. If Amir Khan does get caught up inside with Luis Collazo, I think he's going to lose his fight, and I think he'll get knocked out. If he can stay on the outside, he still might get beaten because Luis Collazo is a good boxer. He's a good fighter overall. So the thing I like about this fight the most, though, is that it's well matched and it's relevant because the winner of this fight is probably going to go on to a really big fight this fall, maybe with Floyd Mayweather. Yeah. And that could even be Luis Collazo. A lot of people are, if Collazo beats Khan, he's not going to get the fight. Well, why not? I mean, look at the guys we've seen Mayweather fight recently. We got Marcos Maidana on Saturday night. If you told anyone 2 years ago that was going to happen, they would have laughed.
Absolutely.
And we had Robert Guerrero a year ago, and that's another guy. If you told people a year, 2 years before that fight happened that he would be fighting Floyd Mayweather, people would have laughed it off. The year that it came up before he actually fought Mayweather, when Guerrero first threw out the challenge, people did laugh at it. I mean, and that was part of the story going into their fight. But, Luis Collazo, if he beats Amir Khan and if he looks impressive doing it, yeah, he could wind up fighting Floyd Mayweather this fall. For one thing, there's not that many guys left for him to fight at 147 or at 154 who he's going to fight that are in the Golden Boy or Mayweather stable. And, for another thing, it might be the kind of fight they could come to some sort of deal with the MGM and take Floyd to the Barclays Center in Brooklyn, which would be enormous for that venue as a legitimate boxing place, which it already is. I mean, I'm not trying to say it's not, but that would make it a major event hub instead of just like, pretty big fights, Bernard Hopkins, Paulie Malignaggi, Zab Judah, things like that. But, if you can get Mayweather out of the MGM for the first time in forever, and he would have to be paid extremely handsomely to do that because of the taxes in New York. But that could happen, or it could just happen at the MGM and just be Mayweather and Collazo, which is, again, I know it sounds weird right now, but what if he wins? I mean, what if he knocks Amir Khan out in 5 rounds and he looks spectacular doing it? That fight looks interesting then.
Yeah, I agree. Was Mayweather's last fight out of the MGM, was that against Cotto?
No, it's Canelo in September. He's been at the MGM for years now. He hasn't fought outside of there in a long, long time.
I mean, didn't he fight Cotto in New York?
No, that was at the MGM.
Oh, well, when was the last time that Floyd fought out of Vegas?
I have no idea. I mean, it's been a long, long time at this point.
Yeah, because that would be a fun story with Collazo. Collazo's a New Yorker. To have that location for the fight would be fantastic. And much like anytime that Cotto fights in New York, it's a huge event, and the energy from the crowd, it just makes it a spectacular, just a spectacular feel, just that Puerto Rican backing that he gets in New York.
Yeah.
This fight to me, I'm still not really sure who to pick. Looking at this fight, I think it might tell us a lot about Amir Khan. I think it's very, very important for his career. Less important than I think it is for Luis Collazo, because Luis Collazo will kind of just still be Luis Collazo if he loses. If Amir Khan loses, that might be the end of his title aspirations unless he puts together a lot of impressive wins. And being honest, his last 2 wins weren't that impressive. Some of that may be due to the fact that Virgil Hunter just doesn't seem to be that good at taking other people's fighters and working with them. He's very good with Ward, but I'm pretty sure he crafted Ward from the beginning.
Exactly.
So, Ward is his fighter, whereas working with Angulo, working with Khan, they haven't looked like Ward. That's for damn sure. So, but it's an interesting test for Khan. It's definitely a crossroads fight for both guys, but for Khan, it's absolutely crucial that he get this win, which is what makes it so interesting. I think that may, in fact, be the element that gets him the win. I think he may just have a bit more of that will to persevere in this fight. Even if he does get hurt, he always is willing to fight back. I'm kind of feeling the same ratio you were. I'm going to go 55-45 Khan. But I'd be very happy to see a Collazo win, and if he wins in an exciting fashion, even if it's just a fun 12-round decision, I would have no problem with Collazo fighting Mayweather next. I think that sounds like a fun style matchup. It's been a while since we've seen somebody fight Mayweather who is actually a slick boxer. All of his past opponents have been guys who the story's been, oh, they're going to try to rough him up. So I'd like to see somebody actually try to apply some craft against the master of the sweet science.
Well, that's actually going into this card why I understand, and I got nothing against the main event really, but that's why I personally preferred the Amir Khan matchup. At least it was someone who's a little bit different. I mean, we'll get into this in a minute, but Maidana isn't much different than the guys that Floyd's been fighting recently with Canelo. And I mean, Guerrero's a southpaw, but he's not exactly taking advantage of the southpaw stance. He certainly didn't in that fight. Is Maidana as good as Cotto? No, not really. But again, with Amir Khan, it would have been someone with some hand speed, someone who wouldn't be so easily counterpunch. I mean, Khan's defense is not good, but Floyd rarely has to look for anything coming back very quickly that he can't, see coming half a mile away. And to jump into the main event in a second here, I think that's kind of what we're going to get again.
I agree. And why don't we jump into that main event? Of course, if you've forgotten since we started the video, or if you've been living under a rock for the past several weeks, it's Floyd Mayweather Jr. versus Marcos Maidana. The story here, of course, Mayweather's 37 years old. He's still at the top of the boxing game. He's still the best, exhibition of boxing skill in the entire sport. No matter who he fights, it's going to be an event just because Mayweather's personality and Mayweather's style are just beautiful to behold. Well, his personality may not be beautiful to behold.
No, I was going to say, I don't think his personality is beautiful to behold at all.
But his style is absolutely picturesque. Yeah. Watching him fight is a pleasure for anybody who's into boxing on a technical level. And everybody else tunes in because they want to see him lose, which is fine by him because he gets the money. Marcos Maidana, the story here is, and I'm quite interested in this fight because of the fact that Maidana has improved astronomically since beginning to train under Robert Garcia, who I think is an absolutely deserving trainer of the year. 2 years ago, Marcos, and I just mentioned this in the breakdown video that I did, but 2 years ago, Marcos Maidana made his welterweight debut. He fought Devin Alexander, and it was an absolute stinker of a fight. He did not look good. He looked like he had no fight in him, which is very uncharacteristic. And I think the biggest indicator of a style change is that in that fight, that was a 10-round decision. Mm-hmm. He threw 91 jabs. Then his very next fight, he has a barn burner with Jesus Sotocaras, and he threw 240 jabs in only 8 rounds, well, 7.5 rounds, because he knocked Sotocaras out. And I think we saw a very different Khan. The thing I like most, not Khan, Maidana. The thing I like most about the post-Garcia Maidana is that he's more technical, but he's not un-Maidana-like. He still has that toughness and that tenacity. He's still completely unafraid of getting hit, and he still gets better after you hurt him. I think this fight has the potential to be very interesting if Floyd lands a really clean counterpunch and hurts Maidana, knocks him down, because when Maidana gets knocked down, much like Juan Manuel Marquez, who also did much better against Floyd after getting knocked down by him, they're just these guys that have this kind of tenacity. They have this will to win. I don't even think it's a physicality thing with their chins. They just take a shot and they bite down and go harder and fight better after that moment.
Yeah, and I do think that could be, maybe that would be sort of the key of making this a competitive fight, because on paper it's not. I mean, it's as good a matchup as you were going to get right here. But I'm, again, I think I'm a little worn out on the send a puncher in and I'm going to rough him up, I'm going to be able to use my power, because you're probably not. I mean, you have to actually hit somebody for your power to matter. And Floyd is still just at 37 so slick, so hard to hit, and more than that, so hard to hit clean, and then more than that, so hard to hit clean more than once. I mean, you might land a good shot. We saw Shane Mosley do it a few years ago, and Floyd was hurt. I mean, Floyd was pretty badly hurt on that. And since we'd never really seen that, it was extremely exciting. But I think it's interesting to go back and watch that and realize just how composed Mayweather was while hurt. I mean, it wasn't pretty. He had to tie him up, but he showed that he knows how to do that, that's exactly what he'll do if he has to, and he survived that round and then took over the fight completely. With Maidana, I don't know if he's got the hand speed or the footwork or the style to really trouble Mayweather. If he hits him, he can hurt him. I mean, Maidana can hurt anybody at 147 if he hits him. And if he lands clean, maybe unlike Mosley, he's got a reckless enough style. And Mosley was a reckless guy when he got aggressive, but Maidana is really, really aggressive. When he gets going and when he smells blood, he will throw hands from every direction possible. If he happens to get turned right, if he's turned southpaw, he'll throw a right jab. He doesn't care. I mean, it really feels kind of like an alley fight when he gets sort of either when he gets hurt or when he feels a significant advantage on offense. I mean, he's a very, very determined fighter, and I think that's the only thing that gives him any real chance in this fight. He's certainly not going to outbox Mayweather. Nobody is. And he's going to have to, frankly, he's going to have to knock him out or knock him down enough times to overcome losing every round in which he doesn't knock him down. So I personally don't see it being a competitive fight, really, but I'm interested in it. And that's, at this point with Floyd Mayweather, that's really the most I ask, is that I be interested in the fight. I was interested when he fought Cotto. I didn't think Cotto was going to win, but it was a decent fight, and it turned out to be a pretty decent fight again, And then Canelo last year I was interested because I thought maybe with the size, maybe with the youth, and I think Canelo was and is an underrated boxer, but then Canelo went out there and basically tried to box with a complete master, which turned out to be a disastrous tactical decision. But I was not interested when it was Robert Guerrero because I didn't see what he could possibly do. I mean, yeah, he'd roughed up Andre Berto, but as Floyd said, that was not Berto again. And he'd been entertaining against Selçuk Aydin, but again, Selçuk Aydin is not Floyd Mayweather. Now, Maidana has beaten Adrian Broner, he's beaten Soto Karass, he's beaten Josecito Lopez, he's beaten Victor Ortiz a few years ago, and he's an extremely resilient guy who we've seen kind of with his back against the wall in fights and just keeps coming at you like he did with Khan, like he did with Ortiz, and he forced Ortiz to quit that fight. But the fight that I'm most interested in when I try to look back at Maidana's fights and sort of scout this is not Broner. It's the Amir Khan fight, because Amir Khan fought a style originally in that fight that was very conducive to success for him in that fight. Now, it's not a Mayweather style, but it was a guy with really fast hands who was waiting on Maidana to make mistakes, and Maidana made some mistakes. As the fight wore on, it got incredibly exciting because both guys were going back and forth, and Maidana was getting up from that body shot knockdown early in that fight was incredible in itself, because that was a vicious shot from Amir Khan. But as the fight wore on, Maidana sort of picked up some momentum. Khan faded a little bit, and then you kind of had two guys meeting in the middle within the in-fight momentum. So I think, look, if Maidana can hurt Mayweather, then we might have a fight. But I'm hesitant to say that this is more of a Cotto-Canelo type matchup on paper for me, where it's interesting, or if it's closer to something like the Guerrero fight, which wasn't that interesting. I don't know if this more resembles that than the better matchups we've seen Floyd have recently.
And I think that Amir Khan fight would be an excellent predictor of this fight were it not for Robert Garcia's influence. I think that
there is that.
If Floyd Mayweather fought that Maidana, it would have been just a much more dominant version of what happened in that fight. Floyd doesn't have Khan's combination punching. He doesn't usually commit to combinations. He'd rather get out of there. It's always defense first with Floyd. But that's also why he's a better fighter than Amir Khan. It's defense first, where it isn't for Khan. And so it would have been more dominant for Floyd down the stretch, because Floyd doesn't tire. At 37 years of age, he's still in better condition than almost every other boxer in the division. And he also knows how to pace himself incredibly well. So he's never, even if you push the pace, he's not gonna tire. And Floyd has this amazing ability, much like Bernard Hopkins, to turn a volume puncher into just a static pile of nothing. Guys who consistently throw near 100 punches around or whatever, they throw like 12 punches around against Floyd Mayweather, because Floyd's the kind of counterfighter where you will literally be left standing in place, bamboozled and off balance as the counterpunch crashes into your jaw. And it
Yeah,
doesn't even have to hit you that hard. It's just that you did not see it coming. You had no idea you were going to miss.
yeah,
Floyd has this thing where he'll let you take a shot where you fully expect to hit him, and then he's not there, and he's hitting you back. The thing is, against Maidana, Maidana's not going to be dissuaded by that. That, like you said, the mentality is what makes this fight interesting in a different way than the Cotto, in a different way than the Canelo fight were. Both of those guys are very game, but Maidana just has this superhuman ability to take punishment and come back better afterwards. So, just like in that Khan fight. And so a more technical version of the toughness we saw in that Khan fight, you know what I mean? Maidana
yeah,
nowadays, I think, would beat Khan. I think that
yeah.
if we saw that fight again, Maidana would beat him. And I think that Maidana would beat the tar out of Devin Alexander if he fought him again. I think he's easily better than he was.
Well, absolutely, and I mentioned the Alexander fight in a preview earlier this week as well because I remember watching that fight, and for a fight that I had 10-0 or 9-1 or whatever I had it, but I think I had it 10-0, a complete shutout. It was memorable because a guy who is so impossible to deter by the 7th round looked ready to go home. I mean, he at that point wasn't doing anything in the fight. He was getting outboxed. He was getting beaten up. He said after the fight that he didn't think he belonged at 147 after all because he had come up for that fight, as had Alexander. And then, you get him with Garcia, and he's made this big turnaround physically, mentally, probably maybe a little bit, but I mean he recovered from a really one-sided loss very nicely. So I mean something good happened there in that camp, and I think Garcia deals well not only with that style of fighter but that mentality of fighter. He kind of keeps them moving forward with their careers. And he faced some adversity with Soto Karass. He was arguably losing the fight with Josecito Lopez before he stopped him. I mean, just overpowered him. Both of those fights were close, but he was able to kind of dig down to a level that neither of those guys had. And both of those guys, by the way, are incredibly brave fighters who are very, very tough. I mean, Lopez took a shellacking from Canelo and didn't want to give up on that fight. Soto Karass we've seen beaten up pretty badly and just does not want to give up on fights. So for Maidana to have a reserve tank that a guy like Lopez or a guy like Soto Karass can't even match, that says a lot. And I don't think Mayweather's going to – I shouldn't say I don't think, but I think there's a chance that Mayweather won't be able to mentally defeat Maidana the way he does other fighters. We saw, especially with Mosley, and I always go back to this fight too to make this point, we saw it from the second round. Mosley got the big shot in, hurt him, had him, not on the run, but holding on for dear life in that round. Third round, Mosley did okay. After that, it's Mayweather taking over, and you can see in the corner, in the between round spots, you can just see almost like the light kind of coming out of Mosley's eyes when he realizes there's nothing more he can do. He's mentally absent starting at about round 7 or 8. And it wasn't that long ago in that fight that it looked like we might have a shocking upset. But, by the end of that fight, Mosley was gone. He was completely done. And he was never the same after that fight. I mean, he'd come into that fight, hadn't fought in a while, but he'd beaten the hell out of Antonio Margarito the fight before that. It was a year ago. But, he wasn't in a bad spot. He was getting older, but he didn't look shot coming in. And he didn't look shot once the fight started, but he looked shot by the end of it. So I think it's hopefully Maidana can avoid that little pitfall that guys get in. It's not a little pitfall; it's a huge pitfall that guys get into with Mayweather. If he can avoid that, it might be interesting in the later rounds if he's mentally there, and even if he's well behind, starting to go for broke because he's not afraid to get knocked out. He's not afraid to get hit. He doesn't. I mean, if he's going to lose, he wants to go out on a shield, except for that Alexander fight, which is, again, why I remember that Alexander fight so vividly, because it was so unlike Marcos Maidana.
Such an anomaly. It's hard to say why that was the case, but I think you can be pretty confident in saying that he won't show up like that again. He's been in against tougher, more demoralizing opponents than Devin Alexander for sure. And so, but that, all of that being said, I think we're both fairly confidently picking Mayweather in this fight.
Yeah, I mean, if I was going percentages on this one, it'd be about 96-4. I mean, I really. It's hard for me to imagine a scenario in which Maidana wins. It makes me happy to imagine a scenario in which Maidana wins.
Yeah.
But
The way I would describe this, the way I see this fight playing out, is that I have every confidence that Mayweather will win, but that Maidana will make him work hard for it.
yeah, that would be the most interesting thing. It would make for the best fight, and it would, give us the most entertainment. It'd be something a little different. Cotto made Mayweather work a little bit.
Yeah.
Mayweather clearly won that fight, but Cotto made him work, so it made the fight so much better just because there was a guy in there who looked like he could hang.
Yeah, and you could almost tell in the way that Mayweather was reacting. Just when I was watching that fight earlier today, Canelo bumps Mayweather in the chin with his shoulder, and Mayweather tries to touch gloves with him.
Yeah.
He didn't do anything wrong. He's like, okay, respect, and Canelo didn't touch his gloves, which I think is why he was so warmed up to him by the end of the fight, because he was thinking, this kid has balls, and
Yeah.
I have a feeling he'll feel the same way about Maidana. He always talks up his opponents. He's known for doing that once the fight gets made, but I have a feeling that Floyd actually will learn to respect a fighter like Marcos Maidana by the end of this fight, and that's because of Maidana's will to win and his toughness and possibly his punching power. His setups have definitely gotten better.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks for joining us, everybody. There you have it, the complete preview for the moment, Mayweather versus Maidana. I hope you guys are looking forward to the fights as much as we are. Scott, where can people find you if they want to hear more boxing-related talk from you?
Well, obviously, badlefthook.com. Our Facebook is at badlefthook as well, and my Twitter is at ScottChristBLH. The site's Twitter is at badlefthook, and I think that's all we've got. Yeah, that's all we've got. Yeah.
Okay, and you can find me at BoxingBush, B-U-S-C-H, on Twitter, and you can also find me at HeavyHandsPodcast.com, and, of course, my MMA writing at Bloody Elbow and Bad Left Hook 2, blah, blah, blah. Too many plugs these days. Thanks for joining us, everybody, and enjoy the fights.